All right. Welcome everyone to our afternoon, one of our afternoon breakout sessions on reclaiming the Sabbath, reshaping the rhythm of our lives. I will ask if you'll keep yourselves muted, until or when that seems appropriate with Ellen. That'll just help with the sound for everybody if we all stay muted. I want to introduce Reverend Ellen Robison. We're so delighted to have her with her today. Ellen serves right now as the Minister of Worship and the Arts at First United Methodist Church in Belmont. She has a fascinating history of service in ministry and in music. She has an undergrad and master's degrees in music education, an MDiv from Duke. She previously served at Myers Park in Minister of Worship and the Arts and at the Riverside Church in New York. Cool thing is she worked for 4 years on the Matlock series. How cool is that? So we're just delighted to have Ellen share with us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Ellen. Thank you, Ellen. And
Thank you.
Ellen was our Mission U study leader several years ago at Pfeiffer for the spiritual growth study. So welcome, Ellen.
Thank you. Can everybody hear? All right. Yes, I'm excited to be here today. It was 2016 when we did the Mission U, the spiritual retreat. It was created for happiness. I don't know if you remember that, but there were smiley faces everywhere and all of our music was happy. And I left right after that to head to the big bad city of New York and was up there for 3 years, had the best time. Oh my goodness. If you're in the arts, that's the place to be with all the music and the theater and the dance and the opera and all of that. But I'm really excited to be with you today. This is a little bit of a new venue. I've been doing Bible studies and things on here on Zoom, but I've not done an actual presentation, and I'm a visual learner. So I've got PowerPoint things that I want to show, but then I want to see your faces. So I don't know how tricky it will be to keep going in and out. So if we stay on the PowerPoint for a while, and Lynn's going to help me with a couple of videos, don't feel badly. I mean, it's not that I don't want to see your face, but it's a couple of step process to get in and out. So anyway, I'm so glad to see your faces today. Let's start with the word of prayer. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift of another beautiful day, a day that was made by you, created for us to worship you, to learn about you, to share about you with the world. And so may we take this time as a gift from you to set aside, to talk about Sabbath, to talk about time, to talk about how you might want us to live our lives here immediately following a pandemic in the year 2021. And so we ask that our hearts be open, our ears be wide, so that we might hear a word from you in the midst of all the words that we will be saying, and that we might come away from this time together a little bit renewed, a little bit refreshed, and a little bit more balanced in realizing that all our time is your time. All this we ask in your Son's holy name. Amen. So the first thing when people talk about Sabbath, the Christian Sabbath, is we tend to think that it is a list of thou shalt and thou shalt not. And we get all caught up in all the things from our Jewish heritage about what we're allowed to do, what we're allowed to turn on, what we're not allowed to turn on. But the truth is, Sabbath is about reshaping the rhythm of our lives, the rhythm of our work time, our family time, our friend time, and yes, the time that we spend with God. And so today we're going to start talking a little bit about a new understanding of time. We've all just come through an experience that they'll be talking about hundreds and hundreds of years from now, when the world literally shut down. And if the ladies on this Zoom are like most of the world, prior to that, we were running here, we were running there, time was precious. We never had enough time, although, as my father used to say, you have the same 24 hours as everyone else. But we were always looking for more time. We wanted some me time. We wanted some time to be with loved ones. We wanted less time at work. And so what I want to do is start today with talking a little bit about how to understand time in God's eyes. So here we go with the first bit of technology. I'm going to try to pull up the PowerPoint. Oh, there we go. Can everybody see? Okie dokie. So back in the 80s, back when cell phones were just really getting started, this was a Sprint ad. I don't even know, I guess Sprint is still in existence. And one of the ways they were trying to sell you on their cell phones, their personal cell phones, a second is a terrible thing to waste. Who would want to take the time to go all the way back home to pick up your landline and make a call? But it sure says a lot about who we were and who we still are when we're worried about wasting a second. This is a picture of Gulliver. If you remember Gulliver's Travels, if you look in his right hand there, you see he has a clock. He has one of a little stopwatch. And those are all the little Lilliputians. If you remember the story, he's a normal sized man, but he appears very large to these folks. And they were all trying to figure out what this was that he used every day. And here's what the story says. The small inhabitants, the Lilliputians, were puzzled by the ticking object that hung at his waist. They determined it must be either some unknown animal or god that he worshipped. But we are more inclined, they said, to the latter opinion because he assured us he seldom did anything without consulting it. And he said it pointed out the time for every action in his life. So our lives prior to the pandemic had taken on a sense of urgency. We no longer look at stopwatches. We all pick up a phone now. I'm one of the few people that still wears a watch. I don't know how many of you ladies wear a watch, but I like telling time from there. But we've gotten addicted to what they call a sense of urgency. I turned 60 this year. So I remember when you would be watching television that it had to be a major crisis. If they did one of those crawls across the bottom of the screen, I mean, it would be the assassination of John F. Kennedy, or it would be the moonwalk. But if you remember now, you look at, we have all the 24-hour news cycles, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they're constantly running those little banners, and they've trained us to panic and stop and look because it must be something urgent. It must be a crisis that I have to know. And so our bodies get attenuated to that so that if someone has taught us, this is an emergency, this is urgent, stop what you're doing, figure out where you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to be doing. We've also taken our little date books that we used to all have, if you remember those, and we found a Google Calendar. And now the calendar, everything goes on there. We take the days and we chop them into all these little pieces. I think you can go into 15-minute intervals, and you can do something from 8 to 8:15, and something else is listed 8:15 to 8:30. We start cutting up time. And remember, this is God's time, into the tiniest little fragments so that we can fill in as many of those little boxes as possible. Our ancestors, however, prior to the clocks, measured time with the rotation of the earth. They measured it by looking at the tides, when high tide came in, low tide. And they looked, if you've ever seen a sundial, they measure by the casting of the shadow on the sun. We have become a time-obsessed culture. We are obsessed with not enough of it, too much of it, and we are running our lives by the clock. If I ask you, you could probably come up with some sayings about time. These are some oldie goldies, the old wives' sayings. A stitch in time saves 9. How many of you have heard time heals all wounds? Time is money. Time flies while you're having fun. Time and tide wait for no man. But here's the issue with all of these sayings. we've set up a false premise. We've decided that time is a commodity, like so many other things in our consumer culture, that we can wrestle and wrangle into those neat little compartments on our Google Calendar or whatever calendar you use. That's the first premise that we have. And we call it time management. We want to take this time that we've all been given, the same 24 hours, and we want to manage it. I want to steal a little time from here to put it here. And I've got everything so lined up that if I get on 485 and there is a slowdown of 5 minutes, every one of my little boxes falls apart. I'm trying to manipulate, I'm trying to make sure that I have managed my time. And guess what? Life has a way of disrupting what I thought was management. Truth of the matter is, you and I have no control over time. I wonder if you remember back when you were a child and it was summer, and the only rule mom had was go outside, go play, and don't come in until dinner. And you had hours in front of you, whether you went to the little pond or maybe a pool. You played with the little bugs and how many of you did the little magnifying glass thing to see if you could chase the bugs around? You found make-believe games to play. Time stretched out in front of you, and it was so much fun. And what parent looking at a small child hasn't wished to stop time? Probably right before they turn into a teenager, but most of us look at our children and think, if I could just stop time and live in this moment, life would be beautiful. But then there's also the time when you're waiting for a medical test report. Time moves incredibly slowly. They've told you you'll get the report on that scan 6 days from now, and the time just seems to drag by. You keep watching the clock, and it gets slower and slower. And then when you are going through grief, time seems to come to a complete standstill. And you look around and you wonder, how is everybody else still going to school and going to work? The world has stopped. My world has stopped when I lost this person that I loved so deeply. That second premise on there, the second fallacy, you and I are the owners of time, and therefore we have complete control over it. Once we recognize that these two sayings here on this slide are completely untrue, it should reshape how we look at time. Me being on 485, getting stuck in a traffic jam and panicking because I'm supposed to be at a meeting at the church, I can't change it. With all my fancy gadgets, unless I guess I had a flying car that I could go over the traffic, I am not the owner and I am not in control of any of this time. So that's a good time for me to do some deep breathing. One of the reasons why we've lost track of who is in control of our time as we reshape our lives by its rhythms is because we've lost track of the seasons. Now, here in the South, I love it in North Carolina because you actually do have a fall, you have a winter, you have a spring, and you have a summer. But you know as well as I do, there are places in Florida, places in California, where it's pretty much between 70 and 80 all the time. We lose that sense of a cycle, of a rhythm. Also, something that changed our grandparents' lives tremendously was the invention of the light bulb. If you're like my grandparents, you got up when the sun rose, you went to bed when the sun went down. Or think about all the climate-controlled buildings that we're in now. If you never went out, the office I have right now, like the office I had at Myers Park, has no windows. So I sit in my little cubicle, and somebody will go by the door and say, "Hey, did you know it's snowing?" Had no idea. Or there's a lightning storm going on. Oh. We get in these climate-controlled buildings without windows, and so we lose that sense of the seasons and the cycles. Most of us are not attached to the earth's rhythm. You and I eat fruit and vegetables out of season all the time. Strawberries in North Carolina should be in the grocery store in May. That's when the strawberry farms grow strawberries. But you and I, if we want to pay for it, in the middle of December, can have strawberries. And one of the things that happened a lot during the pandemic, for those of you that are still working, was that blurred line between work and your personal life. Now, we're expected to be on call. It doesn't matter what your profession is. We're expected to be on call 24/7. You've got a cell phone. You've got Zoom. Remember the old pagers? You're supposed to stay technologically connected through text, all of that. What happens to our bodies, the social scientists and the medical people tell us, is our body stays on high alert at all times. Kind of like watching for that scroll across the bottom of CNN or Fox News. We are constantly attuned to, there's a text coming in. I got to check it. I have to look at it right now. There's a phone call. I need to take it. I need to know who that is. And to use an earthly rhythm analogy, there is no time for our field to lie fallow. I don't know how many of you are from a farm background, but if you just continue to plow and sow and harvest a field over and over and over, year after year, you suck all the nutrients, all the minerals, all the things that make it a good, nourishing soil. Same thing happens to our souls and our physical bodies. If they are constantly on alert, constantly being used, and there is no time for it to lie fallow, then we will also become malnourished, nutrition deficit. Probably one of the most famous sayings in Ecclesiastes: to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. Some of you might have years ago learned the two kinds of time. One is chronos, Chronos. Obviously, that's where we get chronological time. That's the sequential time. 8 o'clock is followed by 9 o'clock, followed by 10 o'clock. In chronological time, we started this session at 2, and we're going to end this session at 3:15. Then there is the time in the Greek word kairos, Kairos, which literally means God's appointed time. It's sacred time. So you think about Abraham and Sarah. There was a chronological time that passed right by them when they could have had children, the times that would have been appropriate and the bodies would have been working and all that would have happened. That was Chronos time. And so they decided they were never going to be able to have children. But in Kairos time, God said, the time is now. This is the appointed time. This is the sacred time. That's Kairos. And it works outside of any clock you and I have ever imagined. You could also say it's Kairos when someone says, I think I might have a problem. It's time for me to go to an AA meeting. Big difference between chronological time, which we can comprehend and understand, and Kairos time. William Penn, who was the Quaker that founded the state of Pennsylvania, says, time is what we want most, but what, alas, we use the worst, and for which God will certainly most strictly reckon with us when time shall be no more. So I once did a workshop with some young adults, and we split them up into small groups, and we had them do a pie chart and talking about how to balance your life. And of course, these were all very bright young people, and they were used to working many, many hours. They were trying to get ahead. They were on that proverbial ladder as they headed up, trying to do that. And we asked them to take a little test to determine in the hours of the week, how much time did you spend in these various categories? This was just one of the examples, but I wonder if it's kind of almost universal. If you are still of working age, more than 50% of your life is spent working. You think about a 40-hour work week. I don't know anybody that still gets a 40-hour work week with all this blurring and working from home and in the building. Most of us are working more than 40 hours a week. We have family time. That's time where you're trying to get folks to doctor's appointments and soccer games and go check on mom at the assisted living. You have a little bit of time to do some recreation, whether that's going to a movie or going out to eat with folks. In a perfect world, you'd have a little bit of time to do some outreach, some community work, whether it's tutoring a child or working at a shelter. And then how much time, again, if you split it all up chronologically, how much time do you spend either in the church building, and you get to count not just worship, but you get to count all those UMW meetings, the planning sessions, working Vacation Bible School, and how much time you also spend with God. Truth of the matter, we look at that circle, you and I split it up into several little pieces. The truth is, that's all God's time. From creation onward, we can split it as much as we want to and say, I'm going to have this much TV time, this much time for church, this much time for me time. Truthfully, it's all God's time. So I have a question. I'm going to back away from my PowerPoint here, and so that we can hear some answers from some folks. The question there on the screen says, if God were going to ask you to stop doing something for 24 hours every week, what might it be? The 24 hours, of course, is the chronological Sabbath time. We know our Jewish ancestors, what they had to do to prepare for Sabbath because they couldn't start a car because there was ignition with the flame. They couldn't cook. There were all kinds of things they couldn't do. So if God were going to ask you to stop doing something for 24 hours every week, what might it be? So now, Lynn, you'll have to help me figure out if folks unmute themselves. And just, what would it be? It could be something that you're ready to give up for 24 hours, or it might be something that would be very hard for you to give up as a Sabbath. This is the interactive part.
Television.
Yes.
For 24
That's what I was
hours?
thinking.
Ooh.
Television, yes.
Television, yes. That's what I was thinking.
How do you think you would do giving that up?
Mm.
I would have to keep myself busy reading or doing housework or washing dishes or cooking or being at work or working in the yard or all the things I do during the commercials.
Any fear of missing out? Are you worried that some big news story might happen in that 24 hours? I see Sandy shaking her head. She's not worried about missing out on anything.
No, because they'll tell it again 1,000 times.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that'd be true.
That would be true.
I don't think I would have any problem giving up TV for 24 hours because I don't watch the news no way. It got to the
Smart.
point where it was redundant. And it's like, I just don't, people ask me, did you hear this? And no, I don't watch the news. Well, it was on Facebook too. And I'm like, well, I don't get on Facebook that much either.
Yeah. Oh, thinking about that, social media, yeah.
I come home and because of my work schedule, I just spend time decompressing a little bit and spend time with my cat. And I lost my boyfriend in February, so I've had to adjust and regroup and do a lot of things since February. And I just don't even turn on the news. I've got a couple of shows that I might watch during the week at certain times, but I'm basically just come home and get into my jammies and do nothing.
You got this Sabbath thing down. Got it.
Yeah.
Wait, so the question, I was hearing Deborah say how she would fill her time, and she has a lot to fill her time. So if TV is a big part of that, if that was part of my pie chart there of TV watching, trying to figure out what you could fill with that time. What is there something that you're always thinking, oh, I wish I had time. I heard him talking about, there was a session today about crochet. I wish I had time to do this, or I wish I had time to do that. And the truth of the matter is, there is time if you give up something else. There is time.
Mhm.
Interesting. All right, let me go back to my screen. We'll just keep it going here. Uh-oh.
Oops.
Hang on. Oh, there we go. So, talking about time. Trying to see it now. This is all in the way. Hang on. I can't read it. Hey, Lynn, how do I make that little black box go away? Woo! I didn't want to do that. It says, I think it says, and on the seventh day, God rested from the
I'm
work.
seeing it, but you can't see it.
No, all I see, well, I have that little black thing up there.
So
That's okay.
if you point down at the bottom of your screen where you see the little zoom icon, the little blue with the little white move camera.
Yeah, I just can't read my screen very well, but it's okay. I think it says, and on the seventh day, God rested from the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. Well, ladies, if we want to say, oh, I can't take any time. No, I have to keep working. No, the world is going to fall apart, or at least my house is going to fall apart if I take a day for rest. Well, my goodness, if we're following the example of God, apparently this has been designated and set aside and sanctified by God, that this is what God wanted for us, was to have a day. Here's an interesting fact. When you see that, this is at the end of the whole creation story. What's fascinating is the last thing God created in creation was the creation of the Sabbath. It was not the making of Adam and Eve. The last thing God did was create the Sabbath, a day apart. Adam and Eve, humankind, you and me, were created on the sixth day. Therefore, if Adam and Eve were created on the sixth day, and the seventh day is a day of rest, their first full day on earth was a day of rest.
Rest.
Their first full day on earth was a day of rest. It's been built into our DNA biologically from the very beginning. God said, let me create Adam and let me create a helper, and he created Eve. And then he said, and here is your day to rest. So God, from the beginning, God blesses and sanctifies the Sabbath, and we enter into that blessing. You also know this is one of the big 10, right? When I say the big 10, the top 10 commandments, does anybody know which one it is? That's the fourth one. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. I think it's one of the few of the 10 commandments that we boast about breaking. How many of you, when someone has come up to you and said, how are you doing? Oh, I am so busy. I am just so busy. I don't have time for a break. I am just, we wear it as a badge of honor. But what you're really saying is, I'm breaking the fourth commandment that said I was to take a day to rest and honor God. Now, many of us boast about, the whole covet your neighbor's stuff or commit murder, but we'll go around boasting about breaking this commandment all the time. There was evening and there was morning, the first day. In this relationship that we have with God, we are co-creators. And the question is, when does the day begin? Now, if you read your Genesis carefully, the day actually begins with the evening. And Eugene Peterson, I don't know if you've read any of his books. He's the one that wrote the Message. If anybody's ever used the Message instead of King James or NRSV or whatever. Here's what he says, and I found this fascinating. When we read Genesis, we see that the days God created always begin at dusk. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. The Hebrew evening-morning sequence conditions us to the rhythms of grace. Listen to this. We go to sleep, and God begins God's work. God is outgrowing the crops even before the farmer is up. God is knitting together the wound before the clinic even opens. The bruises and slights from yesterday have begun to fade, and God has been working on our body, mind, and spirit. When we wake up, we enter into a day of grace and labor that has already begun without us. I go to sleep to get out of the way for a while. Have you ever thought about that? We tend to think the day begins when we wake up, when our alarm goes off, when we put the eggs in the skillet, when we show up at work, when we get the baby out of the crib. The truth is, God has been out working long before, growing crops, starting to heal a wound. You and I wake up into this day that's already there. Kind of helps us get a perspective about those of us that are trying to control all our time. If you think of it that way, I'm going to go to sleep to get out of God's way for a while and let God work. I start to look at the world differently. I start to see it in a different way. Here's what God said to the Israelites. Lord said to Moses, you yourself are to speak to the Israelites. You shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, given in order that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Folks, this is huge. You probably read this before, but what you don't know is prior to Mount Sinai, when Moses came down with the stone tablets, there was no day of rest for the Israelites. It was a 7-day work week, partially because you were enslaved. Nobody gives a slave in Egypt a day off. So when we see that God is offering this as a gift, it is saying, this is my gift to you. You're no longer a beast of burden like we make the horses work all 7 days. You're not just a cog in a wheel, that you are valued for your contribution and you have been set free or liberated from being enslaved to time. To turn down that beautiful gift, crazy. He goes on further in Isaiah. If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, how many of us trample the Sabbath? From pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interests or pursuing your own affairs, then you shall take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth, and I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob. Sabbath is a much bigger deal than the old blue laws. Any of you old enough to remember the old blue laws? You never went, no stores were open. Nothing was open. You didn't go out to eat. There were no restaurants. You didn't go get gas. You didn't get anything. That's when it was closer to Sabbath, that there was a day that you literally had to stop. And now you think about it, everything's open. My sweet father, who passed away 2 years ago, he was a good old Baptist, and he would never let us do anything on Sunday. We couldn't go to the store. We couldn't go to a restaurant because he said, That's making it impossible for those clerks and those shop owners to have a Sabbath. He wasn't worried about, well, I shouldn't be doing this on my Sabbath. He said, if I get to have a Sabbath, he was a school principal for 39 years. If I go to the store, it means those people who are trying to make money to feed their families, they can't have a Sabbath. Different way to look at Sabbath instead of thou shalt and thou shalt not is that it's a gift. It's a liberation. It's a freedom. It's a time to celebrate and a time to worship God and to spend it with your family out in nature. I went the wrong way. Hang on. Do you also know that every Sunday, which is the Sabbath in the Christian tradition, is considered a little Easter? You know how big a deal we make here in North Carolina in the United Methodist Church about Easter. We get brass quartets, we have the choir, we have the lilies, we have it all going on Easter. In Christian early church tradition, every Sunday that came around every 7 days was supposed to be a celebration of the resurrection of Jesus Christ again. Boy, that makes you think when you're like, you get up on a Sunday morning, you're like, I don't think I'll go to church today. I may just take a nap. I may whatever. Would anybody do that on Easter? No, it's a reminder of every 7 days of the life, death, and resurrection of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Wow. So it's not only a day of rest, it's a day of resurrection, it's a day of freedom, and it's one of those things that challenges our society. Our society says, I'm going to take a me day. I'm going to go get a massage. I'm going to go to the pool. I'm going to do, but Sabbath is an alternative way to look at how things could be. You know, that's one of the sayings we always say in the church is about being there and not yet being there. The temptation for most of us that are workaholics is to say, I haven't finished my work. I don't deserve a day off this week. I have a deadline. We feel guilty if we're not constantly working, but the Sabbath gives us permission to stop. We have such a compulsive need to keep driving and accomplishing more and being more successful and meeting the needs of those that we're responsible for. Here's the bottom line. It says that we don't trust the abundance of God. Jesus says, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of them. If I think I have to keep working to keep not only my family and my community and my church and the world running, it's saying I don't trust God to take over for this 24 hours. Unlike the birds of the air, the lilies of the field, we think we know better in all of our wisdom that the world cannot go on without us, and we pay a heavy price in our relationships, in our physical health, and more importantly, in our spiritual well-being. Words of Jesus. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. The message, this is Eugene Peterson's message. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Then come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. This is Jesus talking to the disciples who had major responsibilities and said, let's come away for a little while, spend time with me. From Psalm 37, wherever you are reading aloud, first line, be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently. Be still before the Lord and wait. Be still before the Lord. Be still. Be. And now Lynn's going to share a beautiful song by Kristen Getty called Still My Soul Be Still. Love that piece. It says it all. Going to trust in God. Okay. Next question. Think back to a situation. Might that be the last 18 months or so when you were forced to stop your natural activities? What did you enjoy? What did you learn? And what did you find difficult? All right. What were things that you enjoyed about having your schedule come to a complete screeching halt in March of 2020? What did you learn? And then what was the most difficult thing?
What I enjoyed was not having a routine. I learned that I had overextended myself, and I enjoyed just sitting and being with my animals.
Have you been able to maintain some of that wisdom now that everybody's headed back to work? And
I have, yes, I am learning to say no. So it's been good.
wonderful. What else? Something you enjoyed, something you learned, or something that was really, really hard for you when you were forced to stop with your time management?
Well, the one thing that was really, really hard for me was when I couldn't see my children and grandchildren. During the pandemic, I went and I also had to go through radiation for breast cancer because during the pandemic, I was diagnosed and had to go through all the treatment. So that was hard because it was not a normal routine. I had to go through it by myself. I had to go into surgery by myself. My family couldn't be with me. So, that was hard. But also, and my grandson was born and I couldn't go to the hospital. I had to wait till he came home before I could even see him. And then I had to make sure that I didn't have COVID before I could even do that. So it was not a very fun time at that point. But what I did enjoy is the fact that I did have to go through that hardship with the cancer and everything. I didn't feel pressure to make sure that I was getting everything else that I needed to get done because I had time to actually relax and reflect, and I prayed a lot, and I was able to learn that God was with me and that God was going to help me get through it.
Deborah, that's beautiful. Wow. So there were gifts in the midst of all of that you were going through. There were gifts. Wow. Other folks.
I made a schedule. I found a schedule of
verses to read each day. And by the time you got through in a year, you would have read the whole Bible. And that had been a goal I had always wanted to have, and had just never taken the time to read the whole Bible all the way through. And so I did that, and that was been one of the most meaningful things for me through the whole pandemic. I think it just sort of helped me put everything in perspective as I did that.
Absolutely. What a wonderful thing to do.
I too had enjoyed relaxing and resting a little bit and enjoyed time with my husband. I too missed being able to see my children and my grandchildren. But one of the things that I did spend my time doing was crocheting prayer shawls. And I crocheted about 5 or 6 prayer shawls, which were then delivered to some of our folks from our congregation that are in assisted living facilities this past December. So that was very gratifying, and I still felt that I was doing something to contribute.
That's wonderful. Mm.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I enjoyed
I think you froze on us, Karen.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, you're back.
Okay. I just enjoyed doing Bible studies on Zoom with, it just opened that up. And the hardest thing was for me was my mother was in a senior living, assisted living, and nobody could get in to see her. My sister who was right next to her, or my other sister and I, we just weren't allowed to get in there. And that had to be very hard for my mother.
Absolutely. So sorry.
Well, this is Deborah, and I had been doing crafts and teas and lunches with a small nursing home, and so we couldn't go in anymore, but we dropped off meals at the door. And last week, for the first time, we were able to go in with a meal, and we sat down and ate with them.
Oh,
But
wonderful.
a positive thing I did was what a lot of people do, is I cleaned and dehoarded my house. I don't know if it looks any better, but it weighs thousands of pounds less. My hoard didn't show, but it's gone now. A negative thing is I work in a mother's morning out in a church, and I went from 5 mornings to 0 mornings,
Oh,
and then to 2. And I lost a lot of my physical strength by not being forced. It was my own fault. I could have gone for walks. I could have exercised. I could have done a lot of things, but I did too much nothing. And so I'm working. As soon as I got up to 3 days in my job, of course, we're out for the summer now, my strength started building again. So we'll see on that.
I think we all need to offer ourselves a lot of grace. The one word I kept getting so sick of hearing, I can't remember, Sonia was talking about the news, the word unprecedented. If I never hear the word unprecedented ever again, I mean, it was just, yes, we know there's no precedent. This has never happened like this before. I mean, there was no rule book for how to do church, how to teach school. All those parents trying to homeschool that never dreamt in a million years they would have to do it. There's just got to be a lot of grace for the things we did do and we didn't do. The fact that we survived, that we're all still here and even able to join on this amazing technology. I think one of the things when you mentioned, Deborah, about getting to go inside and eat, the gratitude for the smallest things now, just the gratitude for the smallest things. Nobody ever dreamt that they would not be able to hold their newborn grandchild. There's no reason, but everything is just taken on such deeper meaning now And I think we're all trying desperately to make sure that all those things that we learned and the wisdom that we gained, we don't just step back into, the routine and the rat race and start taking everything for granted again. Because we're humans. That's what we tend to do. We're like, wow, we made it through that. Get back on track, and away we go. I'm hoping we can hold on to some of those again. Oh, thank you for sharing your stories. That's beautiful.
I'm sorry. I think I proved something positive too. I proved, well, my husband is here with me all day, every day. We proved that we don't have to go all the time. We proved that I can go to the store and not get sick if I do the right things. I proved that I could wear a mask and not complain, that it didn't bother me. I could breathe through it. I'm sorry, I could. And now in church, we're singing through our masks. So, I think we proved some strengths that we had that we didn't have. Being alone is proving a strength that you can do that. And mentally, I'm still stable. So
that's fantastic. That's
prove
fantastic.
That too.
That's fantastic. I love it. I love it. So we've been talking about ceasing, about not being able to do things we weren't able to do. Just want to talk about a few things. The Sabbath had a lot of parallels to this pandemic because it was a full force stop. And it wasn't because we were aware of God's beautiful gift. It was because it's not safe. Sabbath means ceasing from work, which means to rest on the Sabbath as if all your work were done. And I love this, rest even from the thought of labor. I don't know if you're like me, but I was a school teacher for 20-something years. Sunday nights, already, my mind was on the week and what was going to happen in school. But if a true Sabbath means you rest even from the thought of labor, God has given us this liberation, this freedom from our enslavement to our jobs, enslavement to our time management skills. Rest on the Sabbath as if it were all done. We're also to cease, and this one was a whole lot harder, from worry, anxiety, and tension. To honor Sabbath is to establish rituals and patterns of joy and gratitude, not running away from problems, but receiving the peace and grace to face them. If you look up Philippians 4, you'll see how to let go of all those worries on the Sabbath day. This is the hardest one probably for us. That's not my face in that picture, but it could be. We're to cease from trying to be God, dispense with the need to create our own future, and trust in the provision of God. I don't know how many of you ladies have done the Enneagram, but I found out I'm a 6. And a 6, you want a 6 on your team because I will run through every possible scenario that could happen, and then I will prepare for that scenario. So I am the one that has plan B, plan C, plan D. So if the first one goes wrong, but there's a lot in me that then often does not trust that God is going to make this work out, that I've got to trust if he clothes the lilies of the field more beautifully than Solomon, God is going, I can trust God to handle. He hasn't failed me yet, as one of the songs goes. He's brought me this far and he hasn't failed me yet. So we rest from work, worry, commerce, and taking control. Instead of worrying about all that, then we're in community, whether it's being out with your family or in the neighborhood. There was a pool party out here last Sunday. I saw everybody gathered around, and the pool was the sprinkler system in this neighborhood I'm living in now. And then, of course, the broader vision that this is all God's time. God created us for the Sabbath because the day after we were made, God said, now rest. Now rest. Probably one of my favorite Psalms, Psalm 90. So teach us to count our days that we may gain a wise heart. How often in the Bible, and especially in Psalms, does it say things like, 1,000 ages in God's sight is but a minute gone. The people, they are like a blade of grass, that they are here today and gone tomorrow. If we're lucky, the psalmist says we'll live 70 years, maybe 80 on the earth. Teach us to gain a wise heart. It's not the quantity of our days, but the quality that is shaped by our hours, our days, our weeks, and years. If you think about it, learning to do Sabbath is like any other skill. If you want to learn how to play the piano, what do you have to do? Practice. You've got to practice it. You've got to study it. You've got to do it over. If you want to be a good friend, how do you do that? You spend time with that friend. You figure out what that friend loves, and you make sure that you share those things with them. If you want to learn to be a good cook, it takes practice. It takes building up your skills. You may start out boiling eggs, and then you may work yourself up to cordon bleu. But it takes practice, and learning how to celebrate Sabbath is a skill that has to be learned. There was a story told about a South American tribe. I can't remember what book I read it in, but they were the tribesmen were the ones that were the group leaders that were going to take a group of English persons through the countryside. And they would carry all of the luggage, on their backs. And so these tribesmen would run and run and run and run, and the Englishmen were trying to keep up. And then all of a sudden, could be in the middle of the day, the tribesmen would sit down, put all the luggage on the ground, and the Englishmen couldn't get them to move no matter what. They said, "What are you doing?" It's, "We still got 3 hours of daylight. We should keep going." And what the tribesmen explained was that they needed to rest and stop, because they'd been moving so quickly, they were giving time for their souls to catch up with them. They believed their bodies had traveled really, really quickly, and they knew it was time to stop and wait for the souls to catch up with them. That's what Sabbath is letting our souls catch up with us, offering to God, trust in God to provide what you're going to need, letting your body rest, letting your mind rest, and delighting in the gift that we've all been given. Lynn's going to share one of my favorite songs of all time. It's by a woman named Carrie Newcomer. It's called "Holy as the Day is Spent." And in here, you will hear her talk about frying eggs is like a psalm. The geese fly overhead. It's all these little tiny things that make the day holy. So finally, Sabbath is about 3 things: rhythm, intentionality, and expectation. We embrace a rhythm that God designed. We intentionally set aside our work and our worries and our control for the day, and we expect the goodness of God, in whom we can rest and be sustained. Sabbath is a gift, and it's a way to reshape our lives in the design that God wishes for us. Ladies, I'd love to close with a word of prayer. You'll pray with me. Holy and gracious God, every day spent in your sight is a holy day. Teach us to follow the rhythm of your creation that is filled with times of action and times of rest. We know that the seed must lie dormant in the ground if it is one day going to bear fruit. The animal hibernates in the winter to preserve energy for the strength it will need in the spring. The nightfall cools the earth, and the human needs to sleep and be renewed. God, help us to reshape the rhythm of our lives by receiving the gift of Sabbath, receiving the rest from worry, the ceasing of work, and the controlling need to be in charge. Help us receive the gift with gratitude and with joy. Help us to practice Sabbath and allow others to benefit from our practice. On this day, prior to Sabbath, help us to make a few plans. Help us to do a little work today so that tomorrow can be a day of rest, a day of joy, a day of community and relationship, and sharing your love. For we are your children that are greatly loved by you and deserve and desire the rest you give. All this we ask in your Son's holy name. Amen. Ladies, it has been a huge delight to get to spend time with you. Maybe next year we'll all be together in person. That would be really wonderful to get some hugs and see some smiles. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it and hope you have a wonderful Sabbath tomorrow.
And thank
you
you.
for that. Thank you so much, Ellen. And before we go, you may not be able to see it, but I just want you to know that United Methodist Women, the Western North Carolina Conference, has made a gift to Mission in Ellen's honor, represented by a special mission recognition pin, which is on its way to her, or she may have just received it. I'm not sure.
I did yesterday.
Very good. I'm glad to know that was the timing we hoped for. So thank you so much for inspiration and helping us to think about reclaiming Sabbath today. What a joy to be with you and everybody. And I hope you'll all join us for our closing worship at 3:45.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.